The frost didn't just bite, it consumed. At 20 years old, Elsa Silverhunted felt the heat of her own life leaching into the indifferent white void of the Siberian taiga. Her breath, once a frantic plume of steam, was now a thinning ribbon of gray. She lay curled in the hollow of an ancient cedar, the fabric of her hiking jacket stiff with ice. She had been missing for 3 days, and as the sun dipped below the jagged horizon, plunging the temperature to a lethal -40 degrees Celsius, the silence of the woods felt like a heavy, cold palm pressing down on her chest. Death in the snow is supposed to be peaceful, a drift into a deep, permanent sleep. But Clarity felt a jolt of primal electricity that defied the cold. Through the crystalline haze of her failing vision, she saw a shadow. It wasn't the jagged edge of a pine or the silhouette of a mountain. It was moving. A massive, rhythmic undulation of orange and black against the blinding white. Tiger. A Siberian behemoth, nearly 800 pounds of apex predator, was standing 5 feet from her frozen sanctuary. How does a creature designed to kill recognize a soul that is trying to live? Why did those amber eyes, swirling with an intelligence that felt ancient and calculated, look at her not as prey, but as a responsibility? Before we unravel this impossible bond and the secret that has been buried in the ice for centuries, I want to say a heartfelt hello to everyone joining us today. This story is one that challenges everything we know about nature and the human spirit. Where are you tuning in from? Whether you're in a warm living room or a cold city, I'm so glad you're here. If you haven't joined our community yet, please hit that subscribe button. We are growing every day and your support helps me bring these high-stakes journeys to your screen. Are you ready for a story that will make you question the boundaries of the heart? Elsa felt a massive sandpaper-rough tongue swipe across her frozen cheek. It was a sensation of fire against ice. The tiger didn't roar. It chuffed, a low vibrating sound of greeting that shook the very marrow of her bones. Then the impossible happened. The beast didn't sink its teeth into her throat. Instead, it draped its massive furnace-hot body over her, pinning her against the cedar but trapping her in a cocoon of thick golden fur. As the warmth began to prickle painfully against her skin, Elsa had one final fleeting thought before the darkness took her. Is this a rescue or is he just keeping his meal warm for later? The real shock, however, wasn't that she survived the night. It was what the tiger did when the search party finally crested the ridge at dawn. It was a revelation that would leave the world's leading scientists speechless and change Elsa's life in ways she could never imagine. Elsa Silverhunted was never supposed to be a victim of the wilderness. She was a woman of the mountains, the daughter of the legendary biologist Rick Silver and the elusive conservationist Diane Hunted. Growing up in the shadow of the Altai Mountains, she had learned to track a lynx before she could drive a car. But Elsa carried a burden that no amount of survival training could soothe. She was the sole survivor of a mysterious plane crash 10 years ago that had claimed her parents' lives. She had spent a decade searching for the truth of that night, a search that had led her to this remote, forbidden sector of the Siberian taiga. Her deepest fear wasn't death. It was disappearing without ever knowing why her parents had been so obsessed with this specific coordinate of the map. She was a woman driven by a fierce, quiet desperation to reconnect with a past that had been stolen from her. The supporting characters in her life were few, but significant. There was Caleb Miller, a grizzled rescue pilot who had served with her father and looked at Elsa with a mixture of pity and awe. "You're chasing ghosts, Elsa," he had warned her before she set out. "And ghosts don't like to be found." Then there was the tiger itself. As the search party approached, they saw the beast they would later call Shere Khan, named after the king of the jungle but possessing the temperament of a guardian. Shere Khan was an anomaly. His fur was threaded with strange silver markings that shimmered like moonlight against the orange. He was a creature of myth, a ghost of the forest that the local indigenous tribes whispered was the spirit of the great ancestor. Relationships in the taiga are usually defined by the food chain, but between Elsa and Shere Khan, something else was forming. As she drifted in and out of consciousness beneath his heavy, warm flank, she didn't feel like a prey animal. She felt a strange, humming resonance in her chest, as if the tiger's heartbeat was synchronizing with her own. The secret she didn't know, the one Shere Khan seemed to sense, was that Elsa's DNA held a sequence that was considered extinct. She wasn't just a girl lost in the snow. She was the final key to an ancient pact between the humans of the north and the apex predators that ruled them. We're building the foundation of a mystery that spans generations. Elsa thinks she's just a hiker, but the forest knows better. Have you ever felt a connection to an animal that felt more than just natural? Like they knew what you were thinking? Let me know in the comments. I love hearing your real-life animal encounters. And if you're ready to see what happens when the rescuers finally find her with this monster, hit that subscribe button. The tiger's ears twitched. He heard the thrum of Caleb's helicopter long before the humans saw the orange fur against the snow. Shere Khan didn't flee. He stood up slowly, shaking the frost from his coat, and let out a roar that wasn't a threat. It was a beacon. He stood over Elsa's body, his head held high, waiting for the humans to arrive. He was the king of this world, and he was handing over his greatest treasure. But as Caleb lowered the rescue basket, he saw something that made his blood run cold. The tiger wasn't just standing over Elsa. He was wearing a collar. A heavy ancient band of silver engraved with the same hunted family crest that was tattooed on Elsa's wrist. The connection was no accident. It was a legacy. The rescue was not a relief. It was a storm. As the helicopter's runners touched the ice, the downdraft whipped the snow into a blinding white frenzy. Caleb Miller leapt from the cockpit, a tranquilizer rifle clutched in his shaking hands. He had seen thousands of predators in his years of flight, but he had never seen a tiger that looked a man in the eye with the steady, judging gaze of a king. "Get away from her!" Caleb screamed over the roar of the blades, leveling the rifle. But Elsa, regaining a sliver of consciousness as the freezing air hit her face, did something that defied all human instinct. She reached out a frost-bitten hand and buried her fingers in the tiger's thick neck fur. "No," she croaked, her voice a dry rasp. He stayed. The tiger, Shere Khan, didn't flinch at the weapon. Instead, he leaned into her touch, his massive head dipping low in a gesture of submissive respect that left the rescue team frozen in their tracks. It was a violation of every law of nature. The first major twist struck when the paramedics surged forward. As they lifted Elsa onto the gurney, the tiger didn't retreat into the trees. He followed. He paced beside the stretcher, his low rhythmic chuffing acting as a strange hypnotic sedative for the terrified medics. But as Caleb moved to block the animal, his eyes snagged on the silver collar once more. Under the high-intensity searchlights, the hunted family crest, a stylized eye inside a sunburst, glowed with an unnatural bioluminescent blue. "My God," Caleb whispered, lowering his gun. "He's not a wild animal. He's a sentinel." The incident escalated hours later at the Siberian research outpost. Elsa was stabilized, her body wrapped in thermal blankets, but the facility was in a state of high alert. The tiger refused to leave the courtyard outside her window. He sat in the snow, a silent, unmoving statue of orange and gold, staring at the glass. That was when the romantic interest entered the fray in the most unexpected way. Julian Kovacs, a specialist in ancient genetics and a man who looked like he belonged in a library rather than a frozen wasteland, burst into the medical wing. He wasn't looking at the medical monitors, he was looking at the tiger. "You don't understand what you've brought back," Julian said, his voice breathless as he turned to Caleb. Then his eyes drifted to Elsa, who was waking up. The air in the room seemed to shift. There was a sudden, sharp spark of recognition between the scientist and the survivor, a pull that felt like gravity. "Who are you?" Elsa asked, her voice stronger now. "I'm the man who's been tracking that tiger for 5 years, Julian said, stepping closer to her bed. "And you're the woman who's supposed to be dead. Do you have any idea what that creature is? He's not just a Siberian tiger. He's a genetically preserved relic of the Scythian era. And he only responds to one bloodline." He leaned in, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that made Elsa's heart race for a reason that had nothing to do with the cold. "He's been waiting for you, Elsa. For 10 years. Since the night your parents' plane went down." The revelation hit like an avalanche. The tiger hadn't just found her by accident. He had been a silent guardian, waiting in the shadows of the taiga for a decade, guarding a secret that Elsa's parents had died to protect. We are standing on the edge of a mystery that changes everything. The tiger isn't just a savior, he's a living piece of Elsa's history. Do you think Julian is someone Elsa can trust, or is he just another hunter looking for a prize? Let me know your theories in the comments. I'm reading all of them. And if you want to know what the Scythian secret is, make sure you're subscribed for the next part. Suddenly, the base's alarms began to blare. The perimeter fences were being breached. But it wasn't animals attacking, it was blacked-out SUVs. A private military group, led by a man known only as Vigo, had arrived. They didn't want the girl. They wanted the sentinel. "Hand over the animal," a voice boomed over a megaphone. "Or we level the station." Elsa looked out the window. Shere Khan stood up, his fur bristling, a low tectonic growl beginning to vibrate in his chest. He looked at Elsa through the glass, and in that moment she made her decision. She wasn't the victim anymore. She was the commander. The arrival of Vigo's mercenaries turned the research outpost into a siege zone. But while the men in tactical gear circled the perimeter, a different kind of tension was weaving itself between Elsa and the man who seemed to hold the keys to her past. Julian Kovacs wasn't just a scientist, he was a man who lived in the friction between myth and reality. "They aren't here for a trophy, Elsa," Julian whispered, his hand momentarily brushing hers as he helped her toward the station's secure data hub. The contact sent a jolt of warmth through her that rivaled the tiger's embrace. "Vigo works for a conglomerate that wants the Scythian sequence. If they can extract it from Shere Khan, they can unlock a biological roadmap to longevity that only the ancient kings possessed. You're the only barrier between them and a weaponized miracle." "And what am I to you, Julian?" Elsa asked, her eyes searching his. "Just another specimen?" Julian stopped in the narrow, metallic hallway. The flickering fluorescent lights cast long shadows over his face, softening the clinical edge of his expression. "5 years ago I thought I was looking for a ghost. But seeing you out there and seeing how he looks at you, I realized I wasn't looking for a tiger. I was looking for the heart of the world." The growing attraction between them was interrupted by a violent shudder. An explosive charge had been set against the outer gates. Outside, Shere Khan was a blur of lethal orange. He moved with a speed that defied physics, leaping onto the roof of a mercenary vehicle, his roar drowning out the sound of gunfire. He wasn't just fighting. He was distracting them, drawing the fire away from the wing where Elsa was hidden. "We have to get to the hangar," Julian urged, his voice tight. "But the road is blocked by Vigo's lead team. We need to move through the underground maintenance tunnels." As they descended into the dark, damp bowels of the station, Elsa's survival instincts took over. She found herself leading the way, her hands steady on a flare gun she'd snatched from the emergency locker. But the tunnels were a labyrinth, and Julian's map was outdated. False leads and dead ends forced them closer together, their shared breath misting in the freezing air of the vents. In the quiet of a service crawl space, Elsa felt the weight of the mystery pressing in. "My father's crest. It's on his collar. How is that possible?" "Your family didn't just study these creatures," Julian revealed, his voice low and intimate in the cramped space. "They were the keepers. The collar is a biolink. It doesn't just identify him. It's supposed to respond to the neural frequency of a hunted. That's why he saved you. He didn't just see a girl, he felt his master's return." But the revelation was cut short. A red dot laser flickered across Julian's chest. A red herring had been planted. A traitor within the outpost had tipped off Vigo to the tunnel entrance. "Don't move," a voice echoed through the tunnel. It was Dr. Eris, the very man who had treated Elsa's frostbite only an hour ago. He held a high-caliber pistol, his face a mask of greed. "I've spent 20 years in this frozen hell for a paycheck. I'm not letting a girl and a cat walk away with my retirement fund." The tension is reaching a boiling point. Betrayal from within, mercenaries outside, and a tiger fighting a war on the snow. Do you think Elsa has what it takes to outsmart a traitor, or will Julian have to make a sacrifice? Tell me in the comments. Are you Team Julian, or do you think Elsa should only trust the tiger? And if you're holding your breath, hit that subscribe button right now. We're heading toward a revelation that will change the history of the taiga forever. "The tiger won't let you leave this mountain, Eris," Elsa said, her voice dropping into a cold, predatory register she didn't know she possessed. "The tiger is busy dying for you," Eris sneered. Suddenly, a massive vibration shook the tunnel walls. It wasn't an explosion. It was a rhythmic, low-frequency hum that seemed to come from the earth itself. Above them, Shere Khan let out a roar that sounded less like an animal and more like a mountain cracking in half. The silver collar on Elsa's wrist, the tattoo she'd had since she was 18, began to glow with the same eerie blue light as the tiger's collar. The bond was no longer just a theory. It was activating. The tunnel air didn't just turn cold, it turned electric. As Dr. Eris leveled his weapon at Elsa, the silver tattoo on her wrist, the one she had always been told was a commemorative mark for her parents, pulsed with a blinding rhythmic sapphire light. It wasn't just ink. It was a subcutaneous interface, a piece of ancient technology masked as a family tradition. "What is happening to you?" Julian gasped, shielding his eyes. "The legacy isn't a story, Eris," Elsa whispered, her voice sounding layered as if 1,000 ancestors were speaking through her. "It's a command." Above them, the ceiling of the maintenance tunnel didn't just collapse. It was shredded. With a force that shouldn't belong to a living creature, Shere Khan tore through 3 feet of reinforced concrete and steel grating. He didn't fall into the tunnel. He descended like a god of the underworld. Dr. Eris didn't even have time to scream before the tiger's massive paw pinned his gun hand to the floor. But Shere Khan didn't kill him. He looked up at Elsa, his amber eyes now glowing with the same sapphire hue as her tattoo. "Julian," Elsa said, her voice trembling as the light faded, "he isn't just a relic. Look at the data on Eris's fallen tablet." Julian grabbed the device. His face went ghostly pale as he scrolled through the encrypted files Vigo had sent to the traitor. "Elsa, this isn't a genetic roadmap to longevity. These files, they aren't about the tiger. They're about you." The game-changing revelation hit like a thunderclap. Shere Khan wasn't the experiment. He was the containment unit. 10 years ago, the plane crash hadn't been an accident. Elsa's parents had discovered that their daughter carried a unique, synthetic neural strand, a bridge between human consciousness and the primal processing power of the natural world. They had placed the key to her abilities inside the tiger's collar, knowing that the animal would find her when she was old enough to handle the burden. "I'm not the keeper," Elsa realized, her heart hammering. "I'm the source. Shere Khan hasn't been guarding a secret. He's been guarding my mind." The romantic connection between Julian and Elsa deepened in a moment of raw vulnerability. Julian reached out not as a scientist, but as a man who finally understood the weight she carried. "They don't want the tiger, Elsa. They want to harvest the strand from you." Shere Khan knew. That's why he didn't just save you from the snow. He was trying to hide you from the world. The stakes were now at their highest point. The tiger let out a low, mournful chuff, nuzzling Elsa's hand. He wasn't a pet or a protector. He was a biological extension of her own soul. And Vigo knew it. "Everything we thought we knew has been flipped upside down. Elsa isn't just a survivor. She's the most valuable biological asset on the planet, and her bond with Shere Khan is literally hardwired. How would you feel if you realized your pet was actually a part of your own consciousness? Drop a comment below. This is getting wild. And if you're ready to see how they escape a literal army of mercenaries now that the cat is out of the bag, hit that subscribe button. The moment of clarity was shattered as the tunnel's emergency lights turned a deep, warning red. Vigo's voice came through the base's intercom, cold and triumphant. "Thank you for activating the link, Ms. Silverhunted. We were having trouble tracking the signal through the tiger's shielding. Now that you've woken up, we have a lock on your position. We're pumping sedative gas into the ventilation system. You can come out quietly or you can sleep for a very, very long time." Elsa looked at Julian, then at Shere Khan. The tiger's glowing eyes reflected her own determination. "We aren't going to the hangar," Elsa said, her jaw tightening. "We're going to the heart of the storm." The sedative gas hissed into the tunnels like a phantom, a sweet, cloying scent that tasted of metallic sleep. Elsa's vision began to swim, the edges of the world fraying into gray. She felt a heavy weight slump beside her. Julian. He had tried to cover his face with his sleeve, but the concentration was too high. He collapsed against the damp concrete, his hand slipping from Elsa's one last time. "Julian," she cried, but her voice was a ghost of a sound. Then came the heavy rhythmic thud of combat boots. The mercenaries didn't look like men anymore. In their gas masks and night vision goggles, they looked like insects from a nightmare. Vigo stepped through the haze. He was a man built of scars and expensive tech. He didn't look at Julian's unconscious form. He didn't even look at the tiger, who was staggering, his massive head swinging low as the gas began to shut down his Scythian-enhanced nervous system. Vigo looked only at Elsa. "You have no idea what it took to find you," Vigo said, his voice muffled by his respirator. 10 years of chasing shadows in the snow. 10 years of your father's sentinel killing my best men." He stepped forward and kicked Shere Khan in the ribs. The tiger let out a weak, pained groan but couldn't lift his paws. The sight of the majestic beast, the creature that had kept her warm when the world was freezing, being humiliated by a coward broke something inside Elsa. "Leave him alone," she gasped, her hands clawing at the floor. "He's obsolete now, Elsa," Vigo sneered. "We don't need the protector once we have the prize." Vigo's men stepped forward with a specialized containment unit, a jagged, metallic harness designed to suppress the neural link. They slammed it onto Shere Khan's neck, the silver collar sparking and going dark. As the connection severed, Elsa felt a physical scream rip through her mind. It felt like a limb being torn off without anesthesia. She was plunged into a terrifying, silent isolation. For the first time since she woke up in the snow, she couldn't feel the tiger's heartbeat. She was just a girl again, alone, defenseless and surrounded by monsters. The mercenaries hauled her up by her arms. She watched through tear-filled eyes as they dragged Julian toward a separate holding cell and loaded the unconscious Shere Khan onto a heavy-duty transport sled. "The girl to the lab," Vigo commanded. "The tiger to the incinerator. We've already sampled his blood. The rest is just evidence of a crime we're about to erase. This is the end of the line. The bond is broken, Julian is gone, and Shere Khan is marked for death. It's the darkest night Elsa has ever known. Have you ever felt like you lost the one thing that made you strong? How did you find the spark to fight back when everything was stripped away? Tell me your stories in the comments. We need that strength right now. And please, if you're rooting for a miracle, subscribe. We need every bit of hope for what comes next." Elsa was strapped into a cold, hydraulic chair in the station's converted medical wing. Steel needles hovered over her temples, guided by a computer that was already mapping the Scythian strand in her brain. "The extraction will be permanent, Ms. Silverhunted," the technician said, his voice devoid of emotion. "You'll live. But you'll never feel that connection again. You'll just be ordinary." Ordinary. The word felt like a death sentence. As the needles began to descend, Elsa looked out the small reinforced window toward the courtyard where they were dousing Shere Khan's sled with accelerant. The world was cold, silent, and hopeless. But in the deepest part of her mind, where the light had gone out, a tiny rhythmic pulse began to throb. Not a sapphire glow, but a deep, blood-red heat. The tiger wasn't dead yet, and he was calling for a war. The needles were inches from Elsa's skin when the vibration began. It wasn't the station's engines or the wind. It was a subatomic hum that resonated in the very marrow of her bones. In the courtyard, the mercenary holding the flare to Shere Khan's sled froze. The tiger's body, drenched in fuel, wasn't burning. Instead, the silver collar was emitting a low, rhythmic pulse of heat so intense it was vaporizing the accelerant before it could ignite. "What's happening to the signal?" Vigo shouted in the lab, staring at the monitors. The mapping of Elsa's brain had flatlined, replaced by a golden geometric pattern that looked like ancient Scythian script. Inside her mind, Elsa wasn't alone anymore. She realized that the darkest hour had been a test, a final failsafe her parents had installed. The link couldn't be broken by a metallic harness. It could only be forged in the fire of true desperation. "Wake up," a voice, not a human voice but a chorus of instinct, echoed through her. Elsa's eyes snapped open. They weren't blue anymore. They were a burning, molten amber. With a surge of strength that shattered the leather restraints of the chair, she grabbed the technician's arm. The sapphire light didn't just return. It exploded outward in a shockwave of neural energy that short-circuited every electronic device in the room. The needles retracted. The doors hissed open. "Julian!" Elsa screamed, her voice a clarion call. 3 floors down in the holding cells, the electronic locks failed. Julian Kovacs, bruised and gasping, fell forward as his cell door swung wide. He didn't know how, but he felt a surge of adrenaline that cleared the last of the sedative gas from his lungs. He saw a guard reaching for a sidearm, but Julian didn't hesitate. He tackled the man with a ferocity he didn't know he possessed, driven by a singular, desperate need to reach the girl in the lab. Out in the courtyard, the incineration had turned into a slaughter. Shere Khan hadn't just woken up, he had evolved. The containment harness lay in melted slag on the snow. The tiger stood 10 feet tall in Elsa's mind, and in reality he was a whirlwind of stripes and fury. He didn't just attack the mercenaries. He moved with tactical precision, disabling the vehicles and creating a path toward the main entrance. Elsa burst through the lab doors, meeting Julian in the central corridor. They collided in a breathless embrace, the scent of ozone and snow between them. "You're glowing," Julian whispered, his hands cupping her face, his eyes filled with a mixture of terror and adoration. "I'm finally seeing," Elsa replied. She took his hand and for a fleeting second the link expanded. Julian saw what she saw, the heat signatures of the men in the walls, the rhythm of the forest outside, and the golden thread connecting them to the tiger. "Vigo is heading for the roof," Julian said, checking a discarded radio. "He has a secondary extraction chopper. If he gets away with the backup drive of your neural map, this never ends." "Then we end it here," Elsa said. "The momentum has shifted. The bond isn't just a rescue tool, it's a weapon of total awareness. Elsa and Julian are finally united, and Shere Khan is reclaiming his throne. Do you believe in the power of a connection so strong it can rewrite your DNA? If you've ever felt like someone was your person, in a way that defied logic, tell me about it in the comments. And if you're ready for the final showdown on the rooftop, hit that subscribe button. The climax is about to hit like a Siberian storm. Elsa led the way, Julian at her side, their movements synchronized by the tiger's predatory rhythm. They weren't running away anymore. They were the hunters. As they reached the final stairwell leading to the helipad, Elsa felt Shere Khan hit the base of the tower. "Together," she whispered. The turning point was complete. Hope wasn't just a feeling. It was a physical force, and it was currently roaring its way up the elevator shaft. The rooftop was a frozen hellscape. The wind howled with the force of 1,000 banshees, whipping the snow into a white shroud that obscured everything. Vigo stood by the open door of the sleek, black extraction chopper, his hand clutching a reinforced briefcase containing the digital blueprint of Elsa's soul. The rotors were already screaming, a mechanical heartbeat drowning out the storm. "You should have stayed in the lab, Elsa," Vigo shouted, his voice barely audible over the gale. "Now you're just a casualty of a failed experiment." He raised a high-powered pulse rifle, but Elsa didn't flinch. She stood at the edge of the helipad, her eyes glowing with a terrifying golden brilliance. Julian stood at her shoulder, his hand anchored on her arm, not just for support, but as a conductor for the energy vibrating through her. "I'm not the experiment, Vigo," Elsa said, her voice echoing with a low tectonic resonance. "I'm the balance." At that moment, the concrete edge of the roof didn't just crack. It exploded. Shere Khan vaulted over the ledge, a blur of orange and silver fire. He didn't land like an animal. He landed like a mountain falling from the sky. The force of his impact sent a shockwave through the helipad, tilting the chopper and forcing Vigo to stumble. "Kill it. Kill it now," Vigo screamed to his pilot. The chopper's side-mounted turret swiveled, but the tiger was already moving. Guided by Elsa's neural mapping, Shere Khan moved in the blind spots of the mechanical sensors, a ghost in the machine. He leaped, his massive claws shearing through the tail rotor assembly like it was made of parchment. The helicopter groaned, spinning wildly before slamming into the reinforced safety netting at the roof's edge. Vigo scrambled for the briefcase, but Elsa was already there. With a speed that felt like a blur of light, she intercepted him. When he swung the rifle butt at her, she didn't block it with her hands. She redirected the kinetic energy with a flick of her wrist, a technique passed down through the Scythian strand. "The connection goes both ways, Vigo," Elsa whispered, her hand closing around the briefcase handle. "You wanted to know what I am? I'm the one who decides who belongs in this forest." With a final guttural roar from Shere Khan, the tiger pinned Vigo against the wreckage of the chopper. The mercenary looked up into the amber eyes of the beast, eyes that held a very human judgment. He dropped the rifle, his face finally showing the one emotion he had spent his life suppressing: pure, unadulterated terror. Elsa grabbed the briefcase and threw it into the swirling abyss of the mountain below. "The data belongs to the wind, Vigo. And so does your legacy." In a final, surprising twist, Elsa didn't order the tiger to kill him. Instead, she reached out and touched Shere Khan's neck. The sapphire light from her tattoo surged into the tiger's silver collar, creating a localized EMP. The station's remaining systems, and the tracking devices in Vigo's tech, fried instantly. Vigo was left shivering and powerless in the dark, surrounded by the wreckage of his greed, while the real power of the taiga stood tall and triumphant. The battle is won. The data is gone, the villain is broken, and the bond has proven itself to be the ultimate force of nature. Is there anything more satisfying than seeing a predator who thought he was a king get humbled by the true spirit of the wilderness? If you're cheering for Elsa and Shere Khan's victory, smash that like button. And stick around. The final conclusion is coming up next, and the shock of what Elsa discovers about her future will leave you speechless. Julian stepped forward, pulling Elsa into his arms as the storm began to break. They stood there, a man of science, a woman of myth, and a tiger of legend, silhouetted against the first rays of a Siberian dawn. "It's over," Julian whispered. "No," Elsa said, looking toward the horizon where more tigers were emerging from the tree line, their eyes glowing in the distance. "It's just beginning." 6 months had passed since the snows of the Siberian taiga had nearly claimed Elsa's life. Today the mountains were dressed in the vibrant greens and golds of a late northern summer. The research outpost had been decommissioned, but the site was far from abandoned. It had been reborn as the silver-hunted sanctuary, a place where the lines between human knowledge and ancient instinct were studied with reverence, not greed. Elsa Silverhunted stood on the same ridge where she had once lay frozen. She looked different now. Her eyes held a permanent spark of amber, and her movements were fluid, possessing a quiet, predatory grace. She had fully integrated the Scythian strand, no longer seeing it as a burden, but as a language she spoke with the world around her. The sound of footsteps on the gravel path made her smile before she even turned around. "The migration patterns are shifting," Julian said, walking up beside her. He looked healthier, the shadows of the siege replaced by a rugged tan. He carried a tablet, but he wasn't looking at the screen. He was looking at Elsa with a gaze that remained unshakably devoted. "They're moving deeper into the valley. It's almost like they're waiting for something." "They're waiting for us," Elsa replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. The romance that had sparked in the freezing tunnels had grown into a partnership of equals. Julian had walked away from the sterile world of corporate genetics to help Elsa manage the sanctuary. He had become the bridge to the modern world, ensuring that the secret of the hunted bloodline remained protected while using their findings to heal the local ecosystem. "I have a gift for you," Julian whispered, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small silver pendant, a perfect replica of the hunted crest, but inside the sunburst was a tiny inlaid piece of amber. "I had it made from the resin of the cedar tree where you were found, to remind you that even in the coldest winter, you were never alone." Elsa touched the pendant, her heart swelling with a peace she hadn't known since she was a child. "I don't need a reminder, Julian. I can feel him." As if on cue, a low tectonic vibration hummed through the ground. From the tall grass of the meadow emerged Shere Khan. The tiger was massive, healthy, and his silver markings caught the sunlight like liquid diamonds. He didn't approach like a beast. He walked up to them and let out a soft chuff, nudging his head against Elsa's hand before leaning his weight against Julian's leg. The shock that had once gripped the world when they saw the girl and the tiger together had faded into a new reality. People finally understood that this wasn't an anomaly, it was a homecoming. Elsa looked out over the vast, untouched wilderness. She knew that Vigo's people were still out there, lurking in the shadows of boardrooms, but they no longer stood a chance. The taiga was awake. The sentinels were multiplying. And the girl who had been saved by a tiger was now the queen of a legacy that would protect the wild for generations to come. "Ready to go home?" Julian asked, taking her hand. Elsa looked at the tiger, then at the man she loved, and finally at the horizon. "I'm already there." And so, the frozen girl became the flame that lit the forest. This story reminds us that sometimes, the things we fear the most are the very things meant to save us. It's about finding your pack, whether they walk on 2 legs or 4. Thank you all so much for being part of this epic journey. Your comments, your theories, and your passion for these stories are what keep this channel alive. If you loved seeing Elsa find her power and her peace, let me know in the comments. I want to hear what this ending meant to you. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We have a brand new adventure starting very soon, and you won't want to miss a single second of the mystery. Until then, stay brave, stay connected, and remember, the wilderness always knows who you truly are. See you in the next one.